Hi everybody, Adrian Plass here.
Yes, and Bridget. Hello.
And this is number 188 in Sounding the Jolly Old Shallows.
Do you know what struck me, Adrian? We say this number, so it's just a number, but that is 188 actual weeks since we thought that everything was coming to an end because it was post-COVID, and we thought that somehow things would be okay in a way that because everybody all over the world have been through a similar crisis. But actually, I mean, the world is in more chaos than I ever in my life remember it being, really.
Yeah, it seems to be, doesn't it? And yet, we're still, and other people are still asking the question, what did COVID do? It's still happening.
Yes, that's true.
And there are various answers to that, which are quite interesting, but we won't talk about that now. But you're right; it's still there, and I think it called our bluff.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that in the church, people had prophesied things and said things would happen, and there were plans, and they didn't happen, and people were dying visibly on the television in appalling circumstances. And the whole business of trying to disguise death, it never ends.
It's really interesting. I mean, the whole stop the world, I want to get off. For a little while, the world had to stop and kind of get off all the things that had driven them and given them either failure or success or whatever, given them a reason for living, disappeared for a while. And
one of the reasons why the Thursdays, where we applauded the NHS on Thursdays, do you remember? But I think that was one of the few things that a lot of people could do, was to acknowledge that particular area that was being helpful.
Interesting you saying that, Adrian. I mean, I wonder whether other people listening will remember that. I mean, I remember we stood at our door and there were some people over the road who had saucepans and tambourines and went for it with their children. We didn't know them.
No,
I'd never met them before, and would wave at them and be part of them, and suddenly we were in the same world and on the same planet, despite however different.
We needed some sense of community because everything was challenged anyway. So what have you been thinking about this week? You're always thinking about something.
No, I'll tell you something, Adrian, that slid from the side. Now, I know there are some people listening to this who won't think much of what I'm going to say, because it's about somebody to do with our royal family. It's actually about Princess Anne, Princess Royal, and she's just been to Sri Lanka, and she said something that's really hit me in the middle of all the news that's bombarding us. She talked about the monarchy, and she talked about the role of the monarchy, and it made sense to me in a way that you might be quite surprised. I mean, she said that she described herself as being part of the eyes and ears of the monarchy, committed to travelling around the UK to support those doing an incredibly good job. And she said there was a need to get out and find out what's going on. And I'll tell you why it struck me. I thought, well, apart from the fact that, in fact, I do quite admire her. She's the one who gets on with the job. There's no frills to Princess Anne.
No, not
she
a
can
lot.
go anywhere in the world and be herself. And I like that.
Yeah,
but it was more than that. It was that I thought, how many times have we been told that we are, in fact, the children of the king?
Who do you by that you mean?
Well, I mean that we are supposed to be children of God.
You mean Christians?
I do. I mean we are children of God. And there's a lot of talk about us being heirs, and about us being special, and about us being adopted children into his kingdom.
So going back from that then, if you're talking about get out and find out what's going on.
Exactly, that's what I thought. I thought I haven't quite looked at the responsibility of what it is to be a Christian, what it is, in other words, to be a son or daughter of the king. And I thought she's put it pretty well, really. To look for things, to get out and find out what's going on.
Do you feel like a daughter of the king?
No, I suppose I don't really, but I do understand something about what she said, because I think that our biggest job is to find out what's going on in people, to look for the good, and that's what she's talking about. She says celebrate those who are doing an incredibly good job. And of course, in the UK, we had Prince William giving a CBE to Rob Burrows. And to Kevin, whose name is going to disappear out of my brain, but the guy who's his deep friend and who's done all these amazing things for him. But, you know, you find out what's going on, what was going on there. They've raised openly, and I mean, I think many people with motor neuron would want to hide away, but he's been public right the way through in order to do something good, and that has been recognised with a CBE in our country. That's quite a big thing, isn't it? Recognising those who are doing an incredibly good job. Does that challenge us, though? I mean, is that where we're at?
I think it tunes in with something that's part of me anyway, in the sense that I always want to know what people are doing.
But that's we're talking about slight beyond nosiness, aren't we?
Oh, thank you very much.
No, but what I mean, you are. I meant it.
Whether it's an incredibly good job or an incredibly bad job.
Ah, right.
I'm very interested in what's happening with and to people.
Yeah.
But I think you're right that there is an actual solid benefit in opening up the good things people are doing. And changing their lives by doing that, and our own, I think. Sometimes in tiny ways.
Yeah.
We're not talking about vast, miraculous change necessarily, are we?
Well, I was thinking about this, Adrian. I was thinking about Paul's letter to the Philippians, and I was thinking about that bit that's become something you put on tea towels, if you like. You know, one of those quotes.
Yeah.
That because it's been so prettified, does not represent the challenge that in fact is in those words.
Yeah, not yet. The whatsoever things are true.
Yeah, we'll read it. Yeah.
It goes. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honourable, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on these things.
But you know, I thought that is a challenge, that you look beyond what the world sees to hunt for something that's honourable, something that's just. I mean, it's hard at the moment, isn't it? Because everywhere we're looking, there's violence.
Well, it's hard because it doesn't make good news, does it? I mean, it doesn't make the sort of news that gets broadcast, and every attempt to change that has failed, really. Because although people don't like the bad news, no one has ever actually become particularly excited about hearing the good things.
But what is that about, Adrian, that we know that newscasters, they're given a list of things, and then if there's something else awful happens, that moves to the top of the list, and the good bit is something to do with a silly dog or something at the end.
Yeah.
Why is that?
I know one newscaster, didn't she? She refused to open the news with a ridiculously shallow piece of news about some famous person, and want to get on to something either more important or more worth having there. But I don't know. I don't know if you're ever going to change that. I mean, I remember at the big Christian conferences, you know, Spring Harvest and what's the other one?
In the UK, it's New Wine, Spring Harvest.
I remember them.
Easter people, all of those. Yeah.
I remember them saying that if they had a seminar or a talk on witchcraft and evil practices, it would be packed. If they had one on ways of increasing people's ability to help with things that were really useful, it would be quite hard to get a large crowd. That may have changed.
That's quite depressing, but it's probably true.
But it doesn't actually tune in with what we like, because we love hearing that people are doing good things.
But let's be honest, every time TV or whatever puts on something that is wholesome and lovely, I mean, you know, James Herriot, for example, you know, every time they do something based on his stories, people love it.
Yeah.
They tune into it. They
Yeah,
love
they
it.
do.
Because why? Because it is those things.
Well,
It's pure, it's
also
lovely,
'cause
it's of good report.
But it's a very entertaining and
Yes, entertaining,
well
and
acted
maybe
and all
that's
that
the
stuff,
problem with
yeah.
something like this. This is
Yeah.
from the King James, and maybe it gets poked into a corner of something that is beyond. It's just a pretty phrase on a tea towel.
I don't know.
So, I mean, the greatest example of the son of the king, who was the king himself, was Jesus.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I was thinking about that. I was thinking about Zacchaeus in particular because I was writing a limerick about it.
Ah, come on!
No,
you can
I'm not going
read
to
that one next week.
Yeah, no, I don't want to read. I don't want
No,
to read it.
you
No,
will.
No, I don't want to read it. But what I was thinking about was that we know in our lives that dogs and children are very wonderful ways of thwarting attempts by certain people to stay in misery and darkness. Those people who have decided they're not going to come out of that because at least they found somewhere to be.
Or because they've been thrown there. I mean, do you remember?
Well, maybe, but
We may have mentioned this before, but do you remember when you were running the secure unit, and we used to take I used to come up to where you were upstairs in this locked unit with some really disturbed teenagers who'd done quite dreadful things. I mean, this was not a sunny place to be. But he thought they were great.
of course,
And he saw something in them. And as a result, that bit of them responded.
Helped,
No, it responded.
yeah.
It was there,
Yeah.
despite all the things that these particular kids had done. And one of them had committed murder, one of them had tried to, one of them had set dogs on little girls. I mean, they were a right old rough crowd. But 2-year-old Matt thought they were great.
Yeah.
And so for that moment, he reached something.
You reached them, yeah. But I mean, the reason I mentioned Zacchaeus was because, as we all know, he climbed up a tree. So
No, what we all know is that he was a very little man.
See Jesus as he went by, and what Jesus did was to thwart his view of himself.
Yes, that's true.
Like a dog that greets you. And
yes,
it's the
that's
same
true.
principle as with sulking, that you have to work very hard to maintain a sulk. And when someone, for instance, asks you a very practical question, you want to have a sulky voice, but you have to somehow say the answer to the question without breaking out of your sulk. With someone like Zacchaeus, who clearly wanted something, otherwise he wouldn't have been up that tree, but he was thwarted by being told that Jesus was coming to eat at his house. And suddenly something in him lifted out of the mire, because he would have been very badly thought of by himself as well, I should think. And I think because normally we talk about people being brought to faith or change in a particular way, but I think that the idea that we are thwarted by goodness is a very interesting one.
Yes.
And it was the same with Jesus and Saul.
Well, let's just stick with Zacchaeus.
Well,
I mean,
Zacchaeus,
I don't think until you were just saying that, I thought, well, he wouldn't have wanted to be part of the crowd. It wasn't just that he was a little man. I mean, our song is Zacchaeus was a very little man, a very little man was he. So he climbed into a sycamore tree. Why did he climb into a tree? He will have been totally unacceptable in the crowd.
Yeah, they wouldn't
He
have
didn't
liked
have
him.
they wouldn't have liked him at all.
Yeah.
So that adds yet something, doesn't it, to the
It
fact
does.
that Jesus saw him and said
he
in
says
the
right in
song,
front
"I'm
of
coming to your
everybody,
house for tea."
because he must have said it loudly.
He will
because
have said it
wouldn't
enough.
Have heard him
No,
otherwise.
exactly, because he was
So
up a tree.
Everybody thinks he's invited that horrible little man.
Yes, a horrible little
He's
man.
going to that horrible little man's house. But you imagine what that does. Part of it, one thing it would do, if my theory is right, is that someone in Zacchaeus' position and certain other people we know would have thought, no, I don't want this.
Oh, really?
I don't know, but I'm saying, going back to if you've managed to find a life that allows you to just about get by,
Yeah.
underneath there's something that pushes up and says,
Yeah.
you could be different, it could change.
It could change.
Suddenly someone makes you feel good.
I think
And
that's the
what
key.
thwarts you.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
think, do I give in to this or do I not? So, like right now, there'll be people listening who have a very low view of themselves. And I
Well,
think
they probably think that God might have a low view of them as well.
Precisely. And the call of God on people's lives is not to say, I know how bad you are and I'm going to make you change. It's to say, I know how potentially good you are. And with Zacchaeus, clearly, he wanted it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have rushed down off the tree. I mean, just as a very simple metaphor, Jesus was saying, come down and be thwarted by my
Yeah,
love.
I like that. I like
You
that.
come down off
But-
that tree
Yeah.
and accept the fact that
Yeah.
you could be happy. That's the great challenge.
That
It's
you
not,
could be special, that you could belong, that you could be more than you think you are.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
I like that very
Yeah.
much. I like that very much.
Thwarted by love.
And our
Yeah.
little 2-year-old son, who looked at these boys who'd done these, and they were all young men, weren't they, who'd done these quite dreadful things.
Yeah.
But because he saw in them, out of, if you like, his ignorance, well, because it was, I mean, he had no idea what your job was, that you were running a secure unit with extremely disturbed and quite violent teenagers. He just saw them as nice people.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a problem for him to see past the outside into anything
Right.
whatsoever is good, whatsoever is just, whatsoever is pure, whatsoever is lovely, whatsoever is of good report. That's what he saw. And sometimes, you know, we talk about seeing through a glass darkly, but we have our own blinking glasses on, don't we? So we see the obvious so often. And I do.
Yeah,
Maybe you
sure we
don't,
all
but I do.
No, I'm sure we all do.
It's so easy to see the obvious and not see beyond it.
But I have seen, and you've seen, as you know, people who take refuge in failure,
Okay.
responding to children and animals because they don't discriminate, as you've just said.
Yeah,
They love them.
they see the best.
Well, they just come and love you.
They don't analyse.
And
They don't need
the
to go
little
through a
bit of you-
checklist.
The little bit of you that is still there, that would
Yeah.
want to be like that, thinks, I can't handle this. I've either got to leave it, get away, or I've got to accept it. And it's a wonderful thing. A wonderful thing.
But it does raise an enormous challenge. I mean, at the moment, when things are so incredibly difficult, to be the child, the dog, if you like, the pet, the person who is going to see beyond, there is still a role for us, you know, even though
Yeah.
the world, this big world, the world, seems completely out of control and doesn't seem as though we have anything that we can possibly do. But we do have a job. I mean,
Well,
that's
so-
what I liked about what Princess Anne said. You've got to get out and look for it.
That's it's interesting that I mean, this thwarting thing has really got into me. That what you just said about Zacchaeus in the tree, Jesus speaks loudly to him in front of a crowd of people who don't like him,
Yeah, with reason.
and suddenly everything changes. Because normally, I mean, we still hear a lot about not exactly hellfire and brimstone preaching, But
well, we wouldn't see
the
it
thing
as
that says you have to change, you have
Yeah.
to turn, you have to do this,
Yeah.
to do that, because Jesus knew in this particular case what would do the trick. He says the one thing that almost nobody would have suggested, that he goes to his house. I mean, in Revelation it says, doesn't it? I'm standing at the door and knocking. If
That's
you hear
right.
my
It's the
voice,
same thing.
I'll come in, not to pray, not to read the Bible, but to have a meal. That's what he says. I'll come in and sup with you.
And that's
Just
why
to
you
eat
love the
with
poem,
you.
the Herbert poem,
Yeah,
so much,
that's
because
right. Yeah.
he says, "But Lord, these eyes are marred. I'm useless. I'm hopeless."
So
And Jesus takes that, hears it, because there's no point in not hearing it, is there?
No.
There's no point in trying to bypass the way that somebody feels. You've got to find an imaginative way, which Jesus did with Zacchaeus. And in the Herbert poem, Love says, "Well, you're going to sit down.
Yeah, you must sit down.
You must sit down and eat.
Yeah.
You're going to be my guest.
Yeah.
You're going to be the most important person in the world for a little while."
It kind of turns things on their head yet again. I don't know how many times you can turn something on its head.
No, the danger
You
of
end up-
turning things again and again.
Well, I don't know. I think there's a healthy aspect to that.
I know,
but-
just so long as you don't end up with somersaults. But
No,
you're right.
I think it's right, and there's something almost romantic about the concept that love breaks into the heart of someone who feels that about themselves that they're rubbish.
I agree with you.
So yeah,
I agree with you. Absolutely agree with you. But so long as we see it as a genuine challenge from God, that we are the children of God, we represent Him. So we've got to get out there and see what's going on in people and find that kernel of something that can be brought alive.
Well, and also, I mean, really importantly, to remember that we don't know, in the case of any person, and looking back, I can remember examples of people that this applied to. We have no idea where they are or what's happened to them.
That's
we
right.
have no idea
And what's really going
about
on.
what would happen if you said to them, "Do you want to come and have a cup of tea?" I mean, something very, very simple. You know, it's interesting.
It's interesting.
Anyway, well, we've suddenly run out of time.
We have, but
yeah.
I guarantee that the beginning of next week will be a limerick about Zacchaeus.
Well, it could be.
I
yes.
think it will be. And any other limericks coming through, we'd love to hear them.
Yeah. Okay.
And we'll speak to you next week.
Yeah. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.